Councillor Ford, Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Veith. All those in favour? Carried. No separate out presentations, delegations, or consent motion, which takes us to staff reports. First up is the results of the public engagement findings report from Waterloo North Hydro, prepared by the CAOs of all three shareholders in this case. I understand we have a presentation to begin. Brad, Tony, the floor is yours. Just after I looked to Councillor Durrell to confirm no pecuniary interest to declare for this meeting at this time. Nope. Perfect. Floor is yours, guys.
Good afternoon. Brad and I are pleased to share with you the results of the public engagement program that we ran for Waterloo North Hydro. As you may recall, what we want to do, one of the guiding principles of this program was to provide the public with balanced and objective information. We know what the direction was from Council in terms of the options. Those are the three that we presented, and there was also 7 evaluation criteria that Council had set out, and so we wanted to make sure that we didn't lead or direct in any way, but that this engagement would be open and that the results would be what they are. The goal of the engagement was to both inform, educate, and to consult. We know that Waterloo North Hydro, while an interesting topic for us, not everyone is as expert or as interested as we'd hope they would be. So part of what we wanted to do is to share some of the details around Waterloo North Hydro, what it's about, what's going on in the industry, and want to present that information in an easy-to-understand format. That would in turn help to inform that the consultation that we'd hope to get from the community around that. We also want to make sure that we provided ample engagement opportunities for the community. The target audiences, obviously, would be the customers of Waterloo North Hydro, and that's the citizens of Waterloo, Woolwich, and Wellesley. Employees are important stakeholders as well, councils, and other stakeholders such as BIAs and chambers. Timeline, we started planning for this back in March. June 7th, there was a joint meeting of councils, and upon approval of the direction and of the engagement approach, we launched the Talk Hydro Initiative Public Engagement Program immediately, and then we ran a 3-month program that it included a number of different tactics. It concluded on August 31st, and what we're going to share with you today are the findings of that work. Some of the tactics that we did employ, we wanted to make sure that we gave people in-person opportunity to come and learn more about Waterloo North Hydro and what we were talking about. So we held public information centres in all 3 of the municipalities. We had an afternoon and evening session in all of the communities. And on June 30th, we also launched what we're calling a virtual PIC. So everything that was available in the in-person opportunity, you could also find online. Unfortunately, we only had about 42 people take advantage of the PICs. We certainly would have liked that number to be larger and a much more robust turnout. But we're finding that really PICs aren't as popular an option for people as they sometimes have been in the past. And also that's partly driven by the topic. It isn't one that, again, is one that, no pun intended, is energized for the community. Other tactics, we used postcards. The top left, have your say, that's the image we used on Facebook. We also used Twitter, both our own as well as our partner municipality shareholders and Waterloo North Hydro. The middle one, that's an image of the website, Talk Hydro website. And then on the right is a bill insert that went in with the July bills for Waterloo North Hydro. So we wanted to make sure that every customer was at least aware and had the opportunity to participate. There were also media stories. We had a dedicated phone number, an email, and message boards were also used.
Thank you, Tony. I'll now highlight some of the key engagement results. The talkhydro.ca website recorded close to 7,200 page views. Additionally, we reached an estimated audience of 4,500 through social media, print, and local media coverage. We feel these results strongly demonstrate the achievement of the inform and educate objective, raising awareness of the asset review. In regards to the consult objective, we feel the results were positive, with 342 completed surveys providing direct feedback regarding the evaluation criteria to be used as guiding principles as the three councils consider the future of Waterloo North Hydro. So what did those 342 surveys tell us? Of the following 7 evaluation criteria, rates and service reliability were the top priorities, with the overall results demonstrating that all of the evaluation criteria are important to the community to varying degrees. In terms of how those evaluation criteria align with our options of standalone, acquisition, or merger, the National Public Relations Report, which is included as Appendix A in the report, the staff report in the packet, it breaks down each of the 7 criteria and how they align with the options. For illustrative purposes, staff's created this consolidated chart, which is summarizing everything on the screen. And similar to the May 23rd KPMG Waterloo North Hydro Review of Strategic Options report, what the evaluation criteria feedback is indicating is that all 3 options are viable and in alignment with the evaluation criteria. Some of the options are stronger than others under certain criteria, but overall there's strong alignment, which is indicating that all 3 options are viable. So thank you for the time this afternoon, where Tony and I could provide a brief overview of the findings, and we're available to answer any questions that council may have prior to considering the report recommendations, which we will put up on the screen. And just for one more point of clarity, we will be providing a similar presentation to the Township of Woolwich Council tomorrow evening. And then on Tuesday, September 26th, we will be providing the same presentation to Township of Wellesley Council. So all 3 councils will be receiving the same information. And it was provided to all 3 councils on the same day last Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brad and Tony. Questions from council? Mayor Jaworski.
Just more of a simple, maybe anecdotal one, but although we received 342 full responses, we did have nearly, I think, 8,000 page views or web visits. So in my mind, I can reasonably conclude that there's probably at least 2,000-3,000 people, who, or a couple thousand, over 1,000 people who've actually went through the information and that, and a smaller sample then chose to comment. So we can say at least a few thousand people looked at it.
Yeah, through you, Chair Henry, to Mayor Jaworski, that's accurate. And what we found is of those that took the time to provide 342 surveys on the 7 evaluation criteria, about 1/3 of them provided some general comments, but most of the feedback was in line with the criteria that we established. So that kind of illustrates well that we had the criteria reasonably well defined.
Great, thank you.
Other questions from council? One I have that's almost tangential to the topic at hand, but I think rises from this kind of engagement. This is in terms of engaging a third party that works in this business, both in terms of public engagement and management, but also specifically in the electricity sector. We've undertaken a wider range of actions through a comprehensive plan that was designed and executed over a period of months. Looking at the feedback that you've received, for where you've received feedback and how, Tony, I think in particular, what do you take away as our Director of Communications for future efforts on this or any other topic in terms of what we can learn for communicating in the future?
Great question, Councillor Henry. I think what this really does illustrate, and I think that we've known, is that when we're going out, we really do need to use and offer multiple choices. That the traditional methods of simply perhaps having an open house, or some of the more, as I say, traditional approaches, while still valid, it's very important that we go to where the people are, and that could mean having pop-up events. For example, we set up here at City Hall, and that did bring in some results as well, but I think it's telling us is that there's much more a splintered approach, and a much more intensive approach has to be undertaken to ensure that we reach people, and that one size does not fit all in terms of reaching people through engagement.
I think the virtual PICs as well was something that we hadn't done as such before. We'd done the traditional version and then other mechanisms, but that seemed to have attracted a lot more attention than the in-person ones.
Yep.
So any other further questions, Council? I'll go to Mayor Jaworski for, he's putting up his hand for stuff. I presume he's moving the motion, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Discussion and comment. I'll go first to Councillor Whaley.
Well, I do appreciate the good work that has gone into both on the consultant side and on the staff side. to make this public engagement fulsome. I appreciate that, but unfortunately, I cannot support the recommendation. From my perspective, the citizens had no say or input on a divestiture option, and I think they should have had such a say, and for that reason, I can't support the motion.
Okay. Other comments from council? I'll make one in closing. Then I think it was important, and it continues to be important for us as council and as a shareholder of this important community entity to go out and engage the public and see what they think in terms of the options that were put before the public, as unanimously agreed to by the shareholders present at the time. It was useful to get the public's feedback on the criteria that we would use to evaluate any and all of the options against our base case of standing alone. And it was useful for me to see through this report and public engagement that what bubbled up to top of mind of the public is what we expected. We would see. You never always get that. It's useful to check and make sure you're connected to both customers and citizens in this regard. But we know that they're interested in stability of rates, and we know that they're interested in reliability of their service. And it was helpful for me also to see that the public recognized the value of the return to shareholder as the number 3 option, that number 3 criteria that came back. So these are things that I'm happy to see that we've engaged the public on and can continue to, should there be more opportunities in the future for any of these to bear particular fruit. And that we've been well served by getting their feedback on this and making sure that the evaluation criteria we'd use, should anything come forward in the future, has been vetted through the public as the right criteria to evaluate it through. So we've got the right lens to look at anything that comes our way in this fast-moving and ever-changing and challenging sector. So with that, if I don't see any further comments, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Whaley. Thank you very much, folks. Next up, we have the indoor recreation facility banner policy. I didn't see a presentation here, so I assume, Janet, you're here for any questions that council may have. Are there any? Mayor Jaworski?
Thank you very much for the report. Looks like a lot of hard work went into covering every square foot of banner space throughout the city. Maybe we could talk a bit about the engagement of our associations, the sports associations, because obviously this is something that's going to be new. We're going to consider it today. How well aware of what we're doing are the sports associations, Janet?
At the beginning of the process, we contacted all of the affiliated sports groups and asked that anyone who is interested in learning more about the policy and giving their feedback contact us. And we had quite a bit of interest. There was about 17 who wanted to provide input and did, and wanted to be kept up to date as the policy development progressed. And so that was very helpful, and so that input was incorporated into the policy and into how we allocated the space.
From your standpoint, they have a strong understanding of what we're doing here today. Some might be happy, some might be less happy, but they have a strong understanding of what we're doing here today.
Yes, and for most of them, they are gaining space in our facilities, because before the space was more allocated historically, so now it's a more equitable approach. And the ones who are losing space, we took time to talk to them individually and make sure that they understood the policy direction and they're all comfortable with it, and they understand that it's good to be equitable.
Well done, thank you.
So equity both on the field and above the field on all of these now, subject to this policy. I'll look then, if there's no further questions from council, for a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Burke. Any comments, council? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. Next up, we have an update on our very important and exciting neighborhood strategy project. Beth, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. We're really excited to be here today to give you an update on the neighborhood strategy. We've sort of transitioning from one phase of the project to the next and actually coming quite close to the end of the project. So looking forward to returning to council in a couple months to share our draft recommendations with you. Just as a reminder, in the early stage of this project, we came to council in June 2016, and we had defined a scope and approach for the project that identified 5 areas of focus. They were social connections, neighborliness, inclusivity, sense of belonging, and placemaking. And that was really based on our first phase of public engagement with about 100 community members, mostly folks from affiliated neighborhood associations. We visited some of those groups. We did a survey. We also did interviews and connected with other cities to understand what their strategies look like and the kinds of questions and issues they were grappling with. Our first major phase of consultation after we got council approval to move ahead on this project was in the fall to winter of September 2016 to February 2017. And we were really trying to get at what are the strengths, weaknesses, challenges, and opportunities in our neighborhoods. We set up, of course, our steering committee for this project, who've met monthly over the course of the project, a resident panel of almost 100 people who've met monthly for a 6-month period and continue to be engaged in the project. We developed a current context report to understand where we're at now and what services we're already providing in our neighborhoods, and then completed our SWOT analysis to understand what are the big issues that we want to explore in more depth as we move forward.
And so for phase 2, that was really from March until August of this year. We focused a lot more on building up our best practice research, and we looked at what other cities in Ontario were doing in neighborhoods to build that neighborliness. We also looked outside of Ontario as well. And we recently did an evaluation of the Neighborhood Matching Fund program. It is a program that's been very successful. It's been running since 2012. So we did a review to see if there are any improvements now that can take place now that it has been running for 5 years. We also identified red tape issues at Council's request last February. And so we identified barriers to neighborhood initiatives, and right now we're having discussion with senior management on those issues. Okay. And throughout this phase, we had great success engaging the community. We spoke with over 1,000 in this phase alone, and many of these community members we engaged through our street teams. These are teams of city staff and volunteers who went out into the community instead of expecting the community to come to us. So we went to many different neighborhood events and activities and city events and just public spaces in the community. We also held an Neighborhood Association and Homes Association Summit to talk to the board leaders and get their input into the strategy. We had a Canada Day contest. We also had volunteers in our community, mostly from our resident panel, doing kitchen table talks, where they invited neighbors to their homes, and they went through some of the questions for the project in their very own homes. And we had an online survey, and the Artist in Residence program also had a neighborhood theme, and we were able to engage community members at those sessions.
We're now at the point where we're starting to work with the steering committee on developing our recommendations. And to do that, we did a thorough analysis of all of the information that we've gathered to date, both from the community input, as well as our best practice research and looking at what other cities are doing, in particular talking to nearby municipalities, London, Kitchener, Guelph, to find out what's working in their neighborhoods. And we've simmered that down into 21 themes that kind of came out to us as the priorities from the community that they'd like this strategy to take a look at. And I won't go through all of these, but just as a few highlights, there was big interest in access to equipment to support neighborhood events and programs, access to indoor space within neighborhoods, recognizing that we already have assets in our neighborhoods, whether they're churches, private businesses that could offer space, our grocery stores, our schools. Looking for things around how neighborhoods engage with the city, whether it's with their council members or with staff, and how we can make improvements there. Looking at connecting neighborhoods to each other. One of the big learnings from the neighborhood summit that we had, Neighborhood Association Summit, was that we had an agenda for that evening, and we certainly got the information that we needed from that group, but they also had a chance to connect with each other, and there was a lot of problem solving going on, and business cards being exchanged, and websites being written down, and a lot of good knowledge sharing that came from bringing those groups together. So certainly an interest in seeing more of that opportunity. A big interest in sort of the diversity, belonging, and inclusion, and how we can make our community more inclusive and build a stronger sense of belonging. An interest in celebrating neighborhood identity and building a sense of identity in neighborhoods. Certainly our neighborhoods that have neighborhood associations tend to have a stronger sense of neighborhood identity than those that don't. And so what can we do to help people develop that sense of place where they live? Looking at things around post-secondary students as neighbors and how we can improve those relationships. Informational tools, a big interest from the community is having staff or the city provide information on how to run particular events so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time and figure out the process themselves. We can provide them with some easy DIY tools to help them through that. And then looking at things around vertical neighborhoods and how vertical neighborhoods are different from our historically horizontal way of living in this community, and a recognition by the city that things have changed quite a bit as we continue to build up. So over the next few months, we'll be looking at those recommendations, at those theme areas, and developing recommendations. And our goal is to bring those back to you at the November 27th council meeting for a review. And if we get council approval, we'd then do a final phase of consultation over the early winter and come back to council in March with a final neighborhood strategy, along with more information about implementation and resource requirements.
So thank you very much to both of you for the work so far and the work ahead. I can certainly say the street team, those, yellow Neighborloo shirts and clipboards and everything else. Janet, you and your team, I saw out at a lot of different events over the summer, and you were always talking to folks, and they were very engaged and animated. And I think that's aside from what the result of this process will be, I think that's a fantastic learning opportunity for us in terms of what really works to engage people where they're at and where they're enjoying their communities. So kudos on that effort, and I think it's bearing some fruit. So questions from council, and this is sort of an information update at this point. Councillor Veith.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you for the update. A couple comments and a question, but I just want to say in my ward we've had a few meetings and a couple of great events, and I have to say my constituents are really pleased with how, working with staff has been really great. They've been getting the support that they need, and some of it's been around bylaw and safety and that kind of thing, but we had a great community event back in August that was really well received, and like I said, great comments about the being able to work with staff really well. And how great our staff are. But my question is around what you call red tape issues. Can you give us a little more on that, or are you going to save that for another day, or or can you just give us a bit more?
Through you, Chair Henry. We have done a pretty thorough review and are sort of meeting with each director responsible for those areas to talk through, are those issues that we can try to find a solution to. So we've already met with bylaw enforcement and talked about some of the things like vendors permits, noise permits, and can we make those processes easier? Are there times that we can exempt neighborhoods from needing some of those requirements if it's creating a big barrier? So we're talking about things like that. We're meeting with parks tomorrow to talk about some of the things we've heard around how the community is interested in using parks, and we're hoping to feed that information into the park strategy. Any other comments, Janet? I think those are a couple examples. Certainly we're looking at how do we improve customer service generally, so that the community has ideas, and I think a neighborhood development is really about neighborhoods being able to determine their own course and the kinds of things they want in their neighborhood. And that means some of the ideas are a bit novel, and unique, and maybe staff haven't heard them before. And so we're looking at how do we figure out how to support staff so that they can say, well, let's work through this and find a way to do it, rather than coming up into a lot of barriers themselves.
Councillor Freeman?
Kind of on that same red tape issue. I think, too, what I've heard in and around my neighborhood is just the ability to be somewhat serendipitous in terms of having an event. And if it's done under the auspices of the neighborhood association, you have these rules. And if somebody just says, hey, let's get together as a neighborhood and do this, they can do it.
Yeah.
And you know, like, I think that's really tough. Like, it makes the volunteers really question why they ever created an association.
Certainly, through you, Councillor Henry. Our neighborhood associations access insurance through the insurance pool through the city, and so that comes with some restrictions. So part of the red tape is looking at, are those reasonable yes and no situations? How do we find the right balance between ensuring public safety, managing risk, and being able to allow the community to do what they want to do? So those are some of the questions that discussions will have to continue having with the municipal insurance pool to find out where those lines are and where we can create a bit more freedom to do some of the things they'd like to do.
And just as a follow-up, like, I can see that it's starting to cause some division within associations. Instead of having people work together, they're purposefully choosing to work separate. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think that brings value more broadly to the whole. And I don't know whether this is salient to your conversations with the insurance pool, but there's different tools that people have now for connecting with one another that allows people to just say, hey, let's all meet at this location or whatever. And I mean, then there's no insurance. Like, so I don't, you know, and nobody's worried about that there's no insurance, you know, because it's not an association event, and it takes away from actually association events.
Mm-hmm. We have certainly heard that sometimes groups feel they shouldn't come to us to ask for help because they're concerned about the no. So that's definitely something that we want to address.
Mayor?
On availability of spaces within the neighborhoods, you anecdotally mentioned schools, but I do know that schools, with all the changes happening, are becoming tighter with respect to security and after-hours access. So I'm just wondering, is there a particular, and anecdotally I can say our places of worship are actually coming to us, to me, to say, you know, we want to be more involved in the community. Tell us how we can help. How can we be more open to the community? And which is a great thing. I'm just more concerned about the school board side of things, and if there's things that maybe either staff or elected officials should be doing in the coming months to have a conversation about that. What sort of trajectory do you see of our citizens using the schools after hours? We've seen Vista Hills had a wonderful event at Edna Stabler. I can't remember which uptown neighborhood does floor hockey and stuff like that at schools, Mary Ellen, and I'm just, you know, how do we keep that up? Those are two instances where it worked well, but I hear other instances where it's, you know, too much, can't get in.
Through you, Councillor Henry, we've already had some discussions, so we're tackling this a couple different ways. At a staff level, we've had discussions with the booking staff at both school boards to understand their processes and policies and what opportunities there might be to allow neighborhoods more access, particularly to indoor space. And certainly the school board, the public school board, was kind enough to reach out to us when a new school opened in Vista Hills to make first access to indoor space available to the neighborhood association in that area. So we've made some progress there, and we have developed a bigger understanding of their processes and their policies and how we can communicate those requirements and deadlines to our community groups so that they can sort of get in the queue to get access. And then certainly Mr. Dykstra, Mr. Bowman have been having discussion at sort of a senior management level with folks from both boards in connection to the Joint Use and Maintenance Committee around outdoor facilities to sort of start that conversation around indoor facilities. And on our steering committee for the neighborhood strategy, we have a planner from the school board, from the public school board, who has indicated to us that the school board has heard loud and clear our interest in creating more opportunities for the community to use indoor space. And we're continuing that conversation next Friday. I'll be attending a meeting with those folks to talk about what we're hearing through the neighborhood strategy. So that work is underway, and we're already making some good progress.
Thank you. And I think I misspoke. I think it's at Vista Hills. I meant Clare Hills Neighborhood Community Association had their event, and even they experienced a change on the school board side where going there to do the barbecue, they can't barbecue anymore. They have to bring going prepared foods, but luckily they're able to partner with Boston Pizza, so the barbecue's off for the future at their events. So anyway, evolving risks.
Yes.
And certainly on the park side and the sports side, I know Commissioner Dykstra's team, as council has heard, is talking to school boards as well. So they're hearing from a lot of us about very similar things, sometimes outside, sometimes inside, which is great. Any other questions, council, for staff at this time? Seeing none, thank you both for this update. We'll look forward to more in November after you've looped back to the neighborhood strategy committee group, citizens that you've engaged to help prioritize these actions and bring them back. And as I read your report, you highlighted and pulled out at the top the red tape review, which, as you know and as we all know, is still very salient and top of mind to many folks. It helps to both map out the roadmap for how people can get there, but also for the roadmap not to be overly complicated and for it to be as short as possible. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but there is certainly a willingness to get to yes and a lot easier to navigate and to navigate reasonably quickly for folks. So appreciate all the work you and the broader team, both of you, are doing. So thank you for coming today. Next up, we have the development charges update progress. We have a couple of presentations. I will leave it to relevant staffs to organize themselves at the podium and tell us what we need to hear and ask us what you need us to decide on.
Great. Great. Thanks. Good afternoon, Council. Myself and Mr. Gary Scanlon from Watson & Associates will be taking you through a joint presentation today to update you on the city's development charge study and draft bylaw update process. You'll recall we were here back in June. Mr. Scanlon presented it then as well. So a bit of a recap on what we discussed then and what we took away. We reviewed updates to the DC Act, mainly requirements from Bill 73 legislation and how that impacts the City of Waterloo. We went through an overview of area rates. We presented pros and cons, and subsequently Council directed staff to explore the merits of an area rate in the City of Waterloo. So currently we have a citywide development charge rate. There was also some discussion about interest to address incentives through affordable housing and non-residential growth through development charges or grants or exemptions, things like that. So we've also done a bit of work to recap that for council in terms of what we recommend in that sense. Looking at kind of where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going to be going. We've done a lot of the calculations, and a lot of the information that's in the draft background study has been done earlier in the year. We presented some draft information on the 26th at the council workshop. Since then, we've been working with our consultants to get all the capital program refined, and that's still ongoing. Our growth projections polished. But what we've done is we've engaged a group of external stakeholders through the development community in the city. We've done this from previous bylaws. They've been insightful and very helpful in moving the background study forward, as well as giving the industry an opportunity to participate in the process. We've had a very inclusive process historically, and this is just carrying on the tradition, and we've had positive feedback from the group in terms of the engagement that we've had with them. So we've reviewed initial material with CMT throughout September in terms of the draft background study and projections and capital programs. Those discussions are still ongoing. That brings us to today, September 18th, and providing council with an update on where we're at and kind of the next few months where we're going to be going with information. You'll notice in the newspaper on the 21st and 28th of September, we'll be having public notice advertisements. It's a requirement of the Development Charges Act for the formal public meeting on October 23rd. So we're providing the required notice to council, or sorry, to the public. On September 29th is when we're going to be releasing the final background study and draft bylaw to the public as well as council. We're going to be continuing the industry group meetings throughout September and as well in October to tie off any loose ends with the study and provide feedback to council in October from the development community. As I mentioned, on October 23rd, council will be presented with the background study and draft bylaw, and this will be the formal public meeting as per the Act. So we'll hear any delegations from the public as required. On December 11th, we'll be coming back to council to actually pass the bylaw. And on December 15th, if the bylaw is passed on the 11th, the implementation of the bylaw will take effect and the new rates will take effect on December 15th. So looking a bit about some of the follow-up from our June 26th workshop, we had some discussion around DC incentives. Staff reviewed the viability of adding additional discretionary exemptions to the bylaw for affordable housing and non-residential development. Exemptions in the bylaw for incentives kind of limit council's ability to review projects on a project-by-project basis. So currently any DC grants are reviewed by council on a one-off basis. Thinking is that if there's a blanket exemption in the DC bylaw, it really limits council in their ability to approve or disapprove a project. So if they meet a certain stipulation as described in the bylaw for the exemption, then it would be granted. This could also cause potential funding shortfalls. So if there's a huge uptake that we didn't anticipate, we'd have to fund the exemption per the bylaw. So for this reason, staff do recommend that we don't incorporate any additional discretionary exemptions into bylaw. Rather, we look at mechanisms outside of bylaw like community improvement plans or DC grants like we do today to provide incentives geared to development that council deems fit. A little bit more on the stakeholder engagement process. So I mentioned we have engaged the development community and assembled a group of external stakeholders. Discussions are ongoing, and they've been instrumental in moving the background study forward in terms of getting feedback from them from what they see out in the field. Staff will also be doing a development charge awareness campaign for the general public to provide information on the study, the bylaw update, and also to disseminate relevant information that the public may be interested on. So any presentations that we've had to date, any public information, public documents, notice requirements, timelines, we'll have that on our development charge website, on the city website. So that brings us to kind of the key decision point for today's update that we need from council. So I'll pass it over to Mr. Scanlon to just go through a bit about the area rating and how we came up with the calculations, and also then staff's recommendation.
Pleasure to be before you again. The last time we were here, back in June, at the end of your discussion, you asked about what would happen if we did area-specific rating for the harder services. So we're looking at water, wastewater, and storm, and taking a look at calculating a charge more on an area basis for those particular services. We talked a little bit about the other services, but I explained the difficulty in doing that and your ability to recover all of the revenue. So we, at that point, were directed to move on and come back to you with some information. I just note for your information once again that Bill 73 that was put into place for January 1st last year now makes it mandatory that council at least examine the use of area rating charges. It is not mandatory for you to pass it. The only thing is for you to consider that as an option, and that's the extent of what the Act requires you to do. So as a result, as I noted, we looked at water, wastewater, and storm as the services. They're the ones that we can most easiest identify the direct benefit, because obviously the pipes provide limitations on where it's going to be used. And we undertook two scenarios for your consideration. Scenario one was we broke the city into three different areas. We'll call it the uptown station areas, greenfields, and then the rest of the city. So obviously there's a number of different areas. We're going to see infill and such. So there's still growth within those areas. However, it was just a blanket allocation. And I'll show you maps in a minute for this. Scenario two basically then collapsed the green fields and the rest of the city into one category. So we just had the up-down station areas versus the combined greenfield rest of the cities. So that was the focus of that. And I'm trying not to do too many numbers because number one, they don't show very well. Number two, they tend to put people asleep. So I'm going to try and minimize the use of it. But what I wanted to demonstrate was for here, and you can see the area. These are the three different areas that we just described. So this is scenario one on the top, scenario two on the bottom. What I wanted to point out is when we're allocating these, doing this calculation, you have to divide the project costs by the growth within the individual areas. So we have the net population increase over the 15 years for those two services being about just under 11,000 people, and we've got about 7,100 jobs. So based on this, we would look to split the projects first, 60% residential benefit and then 40% non-residential benefit. And then we'd carry on with the calculations, dividing splitting the projects on that basis and then dividing it by the growth. And as you can see, when we go into the greenfield areas, we have about 85% which are residential, and then a smaller amount, roughly 16% non-res. And when we get into the rest of the city, we have a very low percentage. We're sitting at about 37% res and 63% non-res. Now, obviously, when we combine these for scenario two, this station uptown is exactly the same as the top. But you can see we've combined these two categories here. And when you do that, we get an average of 78% res, 22% non-res. And you'd say, well, gee, why do the percentages look like that? We have a very large population here, very small population here. So on a weighted basis, you end up having a large residential and a small non-residential. Okay? So we've taken the projects and then we've moved through to calculate it. And as I promised, here's the map. So the green areas is the green fields. We thought that'd be easy to understand. The purple is the station area, and then the white is the rest of the city. So generally those are the areas. So then we're looking for individual projects that'll service the growth within that area. We've looked at this is the total amount of the projects costs that we had for those areas. The water and wastewater was about $35 million. Stormwater was just under 20, and with a total of about $54.5 million. And then what we did was we then split those into the different areas. Now I just point out I've got one additional category. These are the three for scenario one. These are the three areas that I just went through. But then some of the projects still are at a citywide basis. So, and that may be existing debt charges, that's some of the master plan studies. There's a number of items that are programs that would fit into that citywide definition. And then the rest of the projects, then we split into the area. So you can see we've got $11 million out of $55 million, so about 20% of the project cost fall into that citywide calc. So when I present the numbers later, each of them have the component of the citywide, and then they have the individual calculated amounts for each of these areas. Okay, and the same thing on the scenario 2. We've got the citywide and then those two different areas. So when we run through the calculations, we end up with, and we've split it here for storm versus water wastewater. You can see in the uptown area, we end up with a charge of about $4,268. You recall, or maybe you don't recall, the citywide calculation, the uniform calculation for just these services was, I think, $4,466. So it's $4,466, which in this particular case, it'd be a slight reduction of a couple $100 for the station area, and about $250 reduction for the Greenfield area, and then for the rest of the city, actually a slight increase up to $45.22. Now, where we see more of a dispersion is on the non-residential side. The cost, the charge we had calculated for these services was $29.65 per square meter. And you can see that we have a slight reduction here from the $29.65 down to $27.93, so about $1.70, $1.75. A slight adjustment upwards in the Greenfield, but where we see quite a considerable increase is in the rest of the city. So we go from $29.65 up to over $50 per square meter for just those particular services. We then, as I indicated, we combined the Greenfield and the rest of the city and calculated the charge on a similar way. And you can see that now we end up with the same charge as before, $42.68. So basically a reduction of about $200. And you can see we get a slight increase of a little less than $200 for this particular area, this combined area. And similarly on the non-residential side, $29.65 down to $27.93, about $1.70, and a slight increase, about 75 cents, 80 cents for the rest of the area. So we're on an area-specific basis. We're not seeing huge swings one way or another. It's except with the non-residential, I'd identify in scenario 1, we did see quite a bit of a swing. This just summarizes it once again for you, just so you can see it all in one. This was the calculated uniform charge, and here's the 3 different areas here. And on the scenario 2, there's the uptown, and we combine these two, and there's your 4617. Okay? And then on non-residential side, exactly the same thing as I just went through, just to give you in a higher level summary form the calculated charges. I'll turn it back to Michael, but he's done a good job of summarizing the whole process. Just for completeness, in my report, I always like to at least have the next step. So I'll turn it back over to Michael. Oops.
Thanks, Gary. So what we'll do now is just take a quick look at, I've created a summary chart in the appendice to the presentation that will just kind of maybe tie the ends together for council, and then we'll kind of move ahead as planned. So if we just look at appendix here for area rate summary. So Gary was mentioning those charges and those dollars were just for water, wastewater, stormwater, whereas what's kind of the more informative summary view overall is what would development charges be citywide and what would they be for the area specific. So as you can see the first line here, based on the draft, and we'll get to the draft rates in 1 second, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but just for clarity, it would be $14,239 for a single and semi. Based on scenario 2, the engineered services for uptown total general and engineered services for uptown and station would be $14,041, so about $200 less per unit. But then in the rest of the city, so Greenfields and the rest of the infill part of the city, it'd be $14,300 $14,390, so about $160 per unit more. And subsequently the same analysis on the non-res side. To just give you a flavor, Gary mentioned there really isn't a huge swing in the figures, and that's kind of what we're putting forward. So let's just get back now to so to our decision point of area rates. We reviewed the options with the external stakeholder group, and consensus amongst the group is that the citywide rate will be more practical and efficient to administer based on the draft rates calculated. Again, it's a marginal difference, and our stakeholder group felt that it wasn't really worthwhile. It didn't incent the required incentives that council may have been looking for. So staff are recommending maintaining a citywide DC rate for finalization of the background study, and there's a bit more detail in the report as well around that area. This is the draft citywide rates for all the development types. These are draft as of August 28th. Refinements are ongoing, and these rates have probably changed slightly, but it'll give council an idea of kind of the ballpark area where these rates are going to be for the various development types. I have an appendix where I can compare it to current rates, so I can show council if they're interested in terms of, so total current charge for a single and all the various development types is the first row, and then the proposed rates is the total from the chart I just had on with your summary of percent changes here. So you'll see non-residential is actually going down 4% per square meter, which is, I believe, a good incentive for development in the areas for commercial activity. We see singles and semi-detached going up 16%, one bedroom or less going down a little bit, 2 and 3 bedrooms, 4 and 5 bedrooms. So the 4 to 5 bedroom apartments is going up significantly, and this is based on our growth projections and some of the methodologies that Watson has used in the back end, which may have been a bit different from our consultant in the previous DC bylaws. That's why you're seeing a significant difference in the 4 to 5 bedroom range. Multiples being your townhouses, row homes, things like that are going up 27%. And just one thing to note, so this is the percent change on the development charge itself. So when you think about the development charge, it's a component of a house build. So the builder has their cost for the house. They charge a consumer or a customer, say $400,000 for a house. Of that, part of that is the development charge. So if you're thinking if a single detached house, for example, the development charge going up $2,000 on, say, a $400,000 house, that's a 0.5% increase, assuming that full price is passed through to the customer. So just wanted to kind of reiterate that, because sometimes the percentages don't, depending on what you're comparing it against, might provide the wrong context. So just wanted to share this with council. So as I mentioned, the draft rates were reviewed with our external stakeholder group. Staff are continuing discussions with the group regarding the growth projections, the capital program, and also the resultant DC rates of all those figures. So it's a very large model, a lot of moving parts. Changing one thing could change another thing, and then everything ultimately flows down to the development charge rate per unit. I've provided an initial local comparator as well in the report, just to show kind of where our current DC rates are compared to our neighbors, as well as what the draft rate would be. So that's kind of for council's information as well, to understand kind of where the city of Waterloo is compared to our immediate neighbors in the region in Guelph. So that being said, appreciate Gary for going through the draft area calculations of the council. The process is moving to an end. As I mentioned, the final study will be available September 29th, so we have a lot of work to do in the next couple weeks. So with that, staff are recommending that council approve recommendation 1A in your report to be used in finalizing the study, along with some of the other work that we're going to be working on with our stakeholder group and amongst staff and senior management. So I'll take any questions for myself or for Gary on the report or the presentation, or any other development charge related question not covered in the report. We'll feel free to take them if you wish.
So thank you very much, Michael and Gary, for the tag team full of charts and numbers and charts and numbers, and then back to the other charts and the numbers. And so that's certainly what the DC process is all about, heavily regulated and legislated, that translates our growth, the capital that is required to support that growth, and how that translates into charge by unit type and potentially location. And it's that last point that's the decision point in front of us today, so staff can finalize this in a couple of weeks and get it out to do a full-on engagement with one scenario presented in terms of those rates, rather than a bunch of stuff, and engage on for council's ultimate decision point in a couple of months. I think I have that right. So with that, we'll start with questions for either member of the team. Questions from council. Councillor Darrow.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. You mentioned, thank you for the report, Mr. Scanlon, you mentioned that Bill 73 has mandated that cities look at it but not implement it. And I'm just wondering, from your experience, how many other communities are looking to area rates? Is this something that we're seeing that's more common nowadays, and why?
I would say that probably within the greater Golden Horseshoe and Waterloo and being part of that broader area, I'd probably say that municipalities that have water and wastewater, and that's the normal one, probably about 1/3 do it on an area-specific basis. There's a lot of municipalities that just do it on a municipal-wide. Outside of the that area, I'd say it probably moves up to about 90% do it on a uniform basis.
And has it increased recently, would you say? Is it something that cities are now choosing to do, or it's something that's been around for a while?
Thus far, with what we've been doing, we haven't seen any significant change. Municipalities that have done it in the past, normally that's something that they've worked with the development group, and it's something that appears to be the a happy spot for everybody. But I don't think there's any big push that I've been finding with the development group to swing it one way or another. I think
within our community, you mean?
In our community,
yeah.
and across the board. We've got probably about 15, 20 studies going on right now, and I'm not seeing a big push for area rating.
It's just sort of even Steven?
Yes.
Got it.
Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. To Michael, on DC exemptions, I was kind of hopeful that if we were able to put something within the bylaw that a certain thing like affordable housing we didn't collect DCs on, that we wouldn't actually have to in future then pay the DCs exempted on their behalf, much like we do with university buildings and that. I just wondered if that's not an option here, and I'm not sure the affordable housing can be constrained like an academic institution can, or can be defined like an academic institution can. I was wondering if there's any faint hope for something like that in there. I think you've told me no, but I want to hear it again.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Mayor Jaworski, any incentive or exemption type of that regard would be considered a discretionary exemption, and would have to be funded by the DC would have to be paid, whether it's by user rates if it's water, wastewater, or tax-based dollars. So the way Council's been approving grants today, it's using a reserve. It doesn't matter which reserve. It's a non-DC reserve to fund the development charge for a grant for affordable housing. If we were to build that into the bylaw, for example, it'd be the same process where, for example, an uptown core area exemption, the same process is where if that property is exempt, the development charge has to be paid, and it would have to be paid by the city via tax dollars or rates or whatnot. So it's really...
So you've taken away my faint hope. There's no hope.
Well, I wouldn't say there's no hope. I don't believe there's an advantage to doing it in the DC bylaw. I think there's more flexibility outside of the DC bylaw.
Well, I was hoping we would have to pay it. And then I guess on the when you gave the percentage of increases there, so for example, one was up 16%, one was down 1%. Over what time period is it? So the last time we did the DC bylaw, are those rates then fixed, or do they increase by inflation, or is that like, say, for example, that's 16% over the DC bylaw from 20 whatever?
Yeah. So the first row is the current charge, which is our 2017 rate that we're charging on development right now.
Yeah. My question is that one the same as was set back whenever we did last DC bylaw, or has that been adjusted for the adjusted for inflation through the years?
So the current charge has been adjusted by inflation every year.
Okay.
And they always will be based on our new bylaw. So again, any proposed rate would be inflated again in 2018 based on the non-construction price index every third quarter. So we're comparing apples to apples in that sense.
Good, that's what I was asking. Thank you.
Other questions, Council? Seeing none, I'll look for council to select one of the options before us. Mayor Jaworski? So that would be...
Moving the recommendation of
so
single efficiency-wide.
So 1 and 2A on the agenda. You should say yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Veith, comments, Mayor, as mover on your choice?
Effective and efficient, and we had a group of 6 individuals who also were on the plan as well from external.
Other comments, Councillor Darrell?
I'm going to be voting against this simply because, we know that it's almost 3 times more expensive to get services out to suburban areas than urban areas. Some of the buildings in Uptown are an entire suburb. And so I just think brakes are needed where brakes can be found. And so I would be supporting an area-wide. Not supporting the area-wide.
Yes, citywide, yes.
Other comments, Councillor Freeman?
I can really see Councillor Durrell's point. I think where I've been struggling with this and this report is trying to decide what the balance is between fairness on DCs and stimulating growth development. And that's where I really struggle on this, because it feels like the area rate methodology might spur some development where we want it to. And I understand how the report makes reference to the fact that the CIP is the tools to do that with, as opposed to DCs. I just feel like the CIP doesn't have enough uptake. So, maybe the CIP is something that we need to revisit, we do this work and we go back and consider some kind of exemption area. I don't know, maybe that's where we head, but that's what I was struggling with when I was reading this report, was trying to rationalize that, and maybe, as I say, maybe this isn't the right place to do that rationalization. So I can agree. I think I'm going to support the motion where it's at, but I would value staff's insight in terms of other tools that we can use to achieve these things. I know we've run around this tree several times in the last 2 years, and I'm just trying to ask the question: is there any stone that we didn't unturn, shall we say? So I don't know. I would value insight on that. That's just where I'm struggling.
Wondering if there's an appetite for somebody to respond to that. Looking over to my right, Mr. Anderson.
Through you, Chair Henry, I know Justin McFadden is in the audience, so he may want to come up and make comment as well. But I can add some current information with respect to the CIP program in Uptown is seeing some very accelerated uptake, and I think our next progress report will illuminate on that further. And if council wishes to, expand that program or look further into the CIP direction, that might be the avenue for us to drive forward. I'm just looking to see if Justin wants to add anything further.
Through you, Councillor Henry. With respect to the CIP, we actually have seen quite a bit of uptake on the smaller programs this year. Last year was the introduction, essentially, and it was about a third of the way into the year when we started with it. So we've seen about a 350%. There'll be an update in December, but so far this year we've seen about a 350% increase in those smaller programs, facades, small expansions, business improvement loans, that sort of thing. Where we have not seen uptake is with the TIG, and that's just the Tax Incentive Grant for Employment, which is our major activity. And it's largely because of the fact that there aren't as many of those types of major projects that come along. And also developers do prefer that instant gratification of a DC type of exemption upfront versus the back-ended tax incentive that's back-ended. If it's 10-year, it's really a 13 or 14 year when it finally sort of pays itself out over that period of time, as opposed to something that's instant and upfront for a similar amount of money, or perhaps even more. So that's kind of a quick update and sort of how that's viewed and where that's at.
The CIP reflects our cash flow needs and potentially developers, but they have a preference for their cash flow needs over ours. So I think the question I'd ask staff arising from that is, in terms of area rating, the administrative costs of managing that. I mean, we talked about that last time, that having a citywide rate versus an area rate is not the same in terms of our ability to administer and manage that there is some administration and overhead that comes from that. Is there anyone that can speak to what that generally looks like? Because I didn't see that in the report.
Through the chair. Probably one of the areas that's affected most of the time is financing. If you have projects and such that you have to finance, instead of having a pooled system, every time you break it into smaller and smaller units, you have less of a pool to draw on, which means generally municipalities find themselves debenturing a lot more and having to incorporate the costs into the calculations. To some extent, that has an upward impact on the rates over time. Also provides more work for staff to undertake the debenture issuances, etc. You have to account for more of it. If you get into any individual agreements with developers in placing the services, or getting into an agreement to prepay, it means more administration, because now you've got to be monitoring those very specific areas against specific charges. So, and then there's the year-end reporting. So there's a number of different areas. To quantify it is difficult. I think the biggest one is probably the financing, and then the administration I'd have to leave to staff to comment.
And I've seen Mr. Rapp put his hand up.
Certainly. The other aspect that we haven't talked about tonight is the areas have been defined by staff. There would be the controversial debate in the chambers as to where that line is determined. And that would be a very difficult decision as to where that line, multiple lines and properties would be. And that is also part of that administration and going through that process.
So I think that's sort of helpful, because it was sort of an unspoken aspect of the report that was on my list, and I didn't ask it during question time. Other comments, council? I'll add my own. Part of the reason that I supported looking at area rating a couple of months back when we saw that, not just because we had to, but also because there are broader objectives of growth management and where things happen in the city, that I was looking to see if there was alignment between certain area rates that were driven by growth and those broader planning objectives for how we shaped our community. The answer I see from this very detailed analysis in scenario 1, we would screw anybody's ability to build up more employment or non-residential land in the non-greenfield and non-station areas. So if you are trying to add square footage in Northland, your costs skyrocketed, and that probably doesn't happen. So I think that was an inherent negative that flowed from scenario 1. In scenario 2, I think there is alignment between the broader planning objectives and the other piece, but it's 1%, 2% in terms of a difference between the citywide versus the area rating in that. And perhaps I'm wrong, but I wouldn't envision that that 1% would drive a whole lot of change in what people's underlying business models would be for a plan. It's a very, 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 very small percentage, $100 a unit of a project to be able to make that kind of change. So I don't see that it would drive that kind of change by discounting $100 on a rate, which is what we do for the price of increased debentures and challenges of administration. I know there were those around this council table in this council term that thought a complete exemption of DCs in Uptown was right. We had that discussion. We had that decision. This is not that decision. This is about area rating those growth costs and how they're apportioned, and the result from this was couple $100, 1% in terms of a change. And I don't see the value of the burden of the extra financial reporting, what Mr. Rapp is raising and others. I don't see that drives the kind of significant change that warrants that kind of additional administrative costs. So I appreciate the work. The results were in the direction I was looking for. They just weren't enough in the direction that I was looking for to make it worth my while. So I'm supporting the motion that's been moved. So with that, seeing no further comments, all those in favor? Those opposed? Councillor Durrell. Thank you very much. We'll see you back soon, and we'll look forward to that thick reading of all the CapEx projects in a week and a half when they get released. Consideration notice of motion given at a previous meeting, we have none. Notice of motion, we have none. Communications and correspondence and regional information, we have none. Unfinished business, we have none, but I understand we have new business. Councillor Durrell, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henry. As you all know, it's been a very difficult construction season for uptown businesses. And so I'm coming to you today to ask for some additional funds for the BIA to support the businesses. So it'll read that the Waterloo Council directs staff to contribute $5,000 from Council's 2017 contingency fund to the Uptown BIA to support and augment their current promotional practices. I believe that this will also, there's also regional money that will be going to the BIA as well. So I'd appreciate it if our city stepped up to help the Uptown, especially now, after 3 years of construction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Olga, do I need to get a motion to waive notice for that?
Oh, yeah, can you waive notice? Yes.
So I'll get a motion to waive notice. Councillor Durrell, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. All those in favor? Carried. And so motion on the floor, Councillor Durrell, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. Any other discussion on this item? Councillor Veith?
Happy to support it, Councillor Durrell. I just wondered, is this going to speed up the construction, get things moving? Or?
That's a whole other ball game. You can talk to Mayor Jaworski about that and our CAO Tim Anderson about that.
Yeah, I think certainly appreciating the challenges and the news conference and others, this is one thing that we can do now, and appreciate Councillor Durrell bringing this forward. Mayor Jaworski?
Yeah, I think the real opportunity here is to get people to know that there's plenty of free parking on Regina Street. Now our lots are free after 5 p.m. every business day, and on weekends they're free all the time, and to tell people that and to work with the region and the construction company to make sure that there's access to each business. So if people do come up here anytime now, they'll be able to get to their favorite theater, business, spa, free parking in Uptown, and if you need extended stay parking during the day, we had that announcement as well. So I think it's as much as we can do, and I think this $5,000 investment will go towards telling the citizens that they can go shop Uptown. It's open, it's ready to get to.
And we are encouraging them to live local. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, any questions or other new business, Council? One other item to raise that was mentioned before. I will look for a motion to go back into closed session briefly. I will look for someone to move something with the following wording. Since we didn't distribute it, I'll read it just to make sure the Ombuds knows that we've done this right. The Council returned to the closed meeting for the purposes of considering the following subject matter. Advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Legal advice re Waterloo North Hydro Holding Corporation. A matter in respect of which a council, board, committee, or other body may hold a closed meeting under another act, Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, Section 10, Third-Party Information, Section 11, Economic and Other Interests, Waterloo North Hydro Holding Corporation. So would someone be willing to move said motion? Councillor Burke and Councillor Whaley. All those in favor? Carried. And do we need to just adjourn now? I will look for a motion for adjournment of this meeting. Councillor Freeman, Councillor Durrell, she was typing. All those in favor? Carried.